right, so here we go. Chapter 10, continuing on, 10.4, attractive forces in compounds. So we need to describe the attractive forces between ions, polar covalent molecules, and non-polar covalent molecules. So, attractive forces between the molecules and ions hold them close together in liquids and solids. Solids melt and liquids boil when the attractive forces between the molecules are broken. And this normally happens when we apply heat to them. Okay, so the type of attractive forces between molecules either can be dipole-dipole attractions, hydrogen bonding, and dispersion forces. So we'll talk about all three of those types. So polar molecules are attracted to each other by dipole-dipole attractions. We talked about this. It's kind of like the magnetic ends of magnets. The north and south ends of magnets. So if you try to force a north and north together or south and south, they repel each other. But if you flip one, the north and south will attract to each other and then come together. So when the positive end of one dipole is attracted to the negative end of the second dipole, this example is HCl, the attractive forces between the two molecules come together, it brings it together. So hydrogen bonds, especially strong dipole-dipole attraction, occurs between polar molecules containing hydrogen atoms bonded to very electronegative atoms such as fluorine, nitrogen, and oxygen. These bonds are what we use to make actually plastics and polymers, these hydrogen bonds. All right, so a hydrogen atom with a partial positive charge attached to either nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine, and a partial negative charge on nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine. So we can see the hydrogen bond attraction between these two. Okay, and remember, you see positive, negative. Okay, positive, negative. So dispersion forces are very weak attractive forces that occur between nonpolar molecules. It occurs when the movement induces a temporary distortion of the electrons in the molecule, creating a temporary dipole, making it possible for nonpolar molecules to exist as liquids and solids. Okay, so we can see here, excuse me, we can see here that we have the electrons going around the nucleus, and then for a period of time, they are kind of pulled towards another, but it's a temporary, okay? So that's what makes it very weak. It's not really, it's just temporary attraction. Oh, she's kind of pretty, but she has a bad attitude, so I'm going to go back. And then, she's all right, kind of like that. So strongest bonds are ionic bonds. We talked about that, how the electrons will jump, okay? So NaCl, table salt, we can see it right here. Covalent bonds are from nonmetals, such as chlorine to chlorine. Right there, we can see that attraction. And then as we go down, we got hydrogen bonds, dipole to dipole, and then dispersion forces. Okay, so this is F2 and F2. They're temporarily attracted to each other, but they'll kind of jump apart. So we need to indicate the major type of molecular attractions, such as dipole-dipole attractions, hydrogen bonds, or dispersion forces expected between the following: NF3, Cl2, and HF. So if we look at NF3, well, we don't have hydrogen in there, right? Okay, so that leaves us with two options, okay? We could go dipole-to-dipole attraction, and if you draw up the molecule, you'll see that. Cl2, we knew would be dispersion forces, just as it was with fluorine. And then, obviously, it's got hydrogen in it, HF, so it is going to be a hydrogen bond. So as the size and mass of similar types of molecules increase, the attractive forces between the molecules also increase. There are more electrons available to produce stronger temporary dipoles. And that makes sense. If we talk about it, the more you have available with the more electronegativity going on, the more attraction you're going to have. So the increased attractive forces increases the boiling points of these molecules. So if we look at this, okay, these are all hydrocarbons here. So we got methane, CH4, molecular mass 16.04, boiling point negative 162 degrees Celsius. Then we have ethane, C2H6, there's more, okay? These are all hydrogen bonds, okay? So we've got 30.07, negative 89, propane, butane, so on and so on and so on. So if we had heptane, okay, which would be 7, then we would expect the boiling point to be even greater. Or octane, which you know that is a fuel additive, will be, it's liquid. We can see it as liquid, all right? When we pour gasoline into a container, we may see evaporation, but we don't see it really rapidly boiling off. So the melting point of a substance is related to the strength of the attractive forces between its particles. Molecules with weaker dispersion forces have lower melting points, and it takes less energy to break the dispersion forces. Stronger dipole-to-dipole forces, or hydrogen bonds, require more energy to break these forces between them, meaning that the melting point of a substance is definitely related to the strength of the attractive forces, just like the boiling point would be related to the attraction. So the highest melting point occurs in ionic bonds, because they have very strong attractive forces between positive and negative. Okay, ionic compounds require large amounts of energy to break these forces and melt the substance. So if we look at MgF2, okay, it's got a melting point of 1248 degrees Celsius. If we look at NaCl, or table salt, it's got a melting point of 801 degrees Celsius. Okay, water, we should all know the melting point of water at 0 Celsius, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or we could also say 273 degrees Kelvin, right? NH3, negative 78, dipole attractions, you can see as the energy becomes less, so does the melting point of the substance, and so on and so on and so on. So biological molecules have such as proteins have many different functions. They're needed for structural components such as cartilage, muscle, hair, nails, the formation of enzymes to regulate biological reactions, how our bodies work, the transport of oxygen in our blood and muscles. That is all performed by proteins. Proteins are composed of building blocks called amino acids. Amino acids have a central carbon atom bonded to them. So a negative NH3, a positive NH3 from an amine, and a negative COO from a carboxylic acid, and an H atom and a side chain called an R group. Okay, R group, I'll explain R groups. All right. So an R group, different amino acids have different R groups. The R groups on alanine is CH3, so it just represents the group associated with all the different structures. So we got this methyl group here. This is our amino acid grouping, and then we've got our carboxylate group over here. Some examples of other amino acids with their side chains include serine, asparagine, lysine, aspartic acid. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, proteins would be more Lisa's specialty, so when you have her in the lab, you may want to ask her a little bit more about how proteins work in the body and interact, and how they actually function. It's a biological effect. I can tell you what a protein is, but and I know you're supposed to take it, get big and strong, but that's about all I can tell you about proteins in the biological sense. In the primary structure of proteins, amino acids are linked by peptide bonds between the amine and carboxylic acid groups. Okay, so in a higher level structure of protein, hydrogen bonds are formed to fold these proteins into different shapes, such as an alpha helix. So the helical nature. All right. Hydrogen bonding in proteins also occurs between the polar side chains of the amino acids on the outer surface of the protein, the OH and the H of polar water molecules. And this is why water is so important to the function of our lives, okay? Because it's working within the system of not only heating and cooling, but it's hydration. It works with the proteins. It's the building blocks of who we are. Okay, so identify the compound in each pair that has the highest melting point and the higher melting point, and explain. So let's look at NCl3 or NH3. What do you think? So NH3 is going to have the higher melting point than NCl3 because the hydrogen bonds in NH3 are stronger than the dipole attractions and NCl3. HBr or Br2, HBr is going to have the higher melting point than Br2 because dipole attraction in HBr versus the dispersion forces that we see in this binary molecule, Br2. KCl or HCl, KCl would have the higher melting point than HCl because of its ionic bonds versus than the dipole attractions in HCl. So, hope this makes sense. I hope this helps. And, all right.